Welcome back to the Rhodes to Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rhodes. This is a show where I dedicate the hour interviewing folks that have built wealth in a variety of ways, getting a little bit about their background, but more importantly, extracting successful tips, tricks, strategies, habits, things that they have used and implemented in their lives that we can then rip off, duplicate, and hopefully find some success of our own. This week, I have the honor of interviewing Rachel Hernandez, who online is more frequently known as the mobile home girl. Rachel's been investing in real estate as a whole for more than 10 years, but as her nickname implies, over those years, she has slowly specialized in mobile homes. Today, she has more than 50 mobile homes across a few parks within her portfolio. She is also the author of an Amazon bestseller, Real Estate Investing Sucks. You can find a few flavors of that on Amazon. As always, I do capture a bit of Rachel's story here at the top of the interview. I will let that conversation expose you to her background and those details. I don't want to ruin that, but I have one of the most tenured real estate bloggers on the podcast, the number one writer for mobile homes on Quora, and an owner that has more than 4 mobile home parks on the podcast. So what do we spend the hour covering? We talk a bit about the pros and cons of mobile home investing. This is very different than single family or multi-family strategies. So we kind of lay that out. We also talk about the different approaches to mobile home investing. You'll find that there are different flavors and how people attack this. We'll also talk about the investment opportunity as a whole. And as you approach one of these opportunities, what should you be looking for? What does that checklist look like? And we'll close with the numbers, right? What can you expect to pay and what can you expect to make in return? As always, I will be back here after the show with a quick wrap up. But with that, I bring to you an episode that has struck several chords for me, Rachel Hernandez.
It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health. For my kids and my spouse. Financially sound. You the bad dad.
Miss Rachel, this episode has a particularly special place, an interesting place in my heart. I grew up here in Houston, far east Houston, this area called Channelview. And on my street, probably 15, 18 houses down, I lived in the cul-de-sac. On the other side was a trailer park. My grandparents lived in a trailer/mobile home. It wasn't mobile any longer, but it was a trailer out on a piece of property. My grandfather's passed. My grandmother still lives in the same mobile home today. And it's interesting because now I have you on the show here to talk about investing in mobile homes and trailer parks or trailers. And so it's an interesting sort of soothing, surreal feeling to see this circle of growing up 12 houses down from one, or now talking about investing in them. All of this to say, I've really enjoyed not only the research phase of this, it's sort of brought back memories and got me excited, but also I really appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your time. I know you're extremely busy.
Sure thing, Josh. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. For the listeners that haven't followed you over, that just tune into Rhodes to Wealth week over week, I learned this morning most people dedicate themselves to less than 6 podcasts. So let's say someone hasn't dedicated themselves to your podcast and mine, and you have some new listeners here. They've never heard your journey, your story before. Could you give us just a broad stroke, who you are, what you have going on?
Sure, no problem. My name's Rachel Hernandez, also known as the Mobile Home Girl with a U on the web. And I've been blogging on my website, adventuresinmobilehomes.com, since 2007. And basically, it started as a journey to document all my stories and adventures as a mobile home investor. So for me personally, Josh, I came from single family homes. I started by reading the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, learned about passive income and doing that through real estate, receiving the cash flow from the rental properties that you have. So I started out in real estate back a long time ago, starting as a bird dog. So basically, I would look for deals for other investors, other real estate investors, and then I get paid for the leads that they buy. And then from there, I went into wholesaling. So basically, I took it a step further. I found the deals, but also put the deals under contract, then assigned my interest in the deals to other investors, mostly rehabbers who wanted to fix up or retail the homes. So from there, I built up cash that way. And after a while, I started just buying and holding single family homes, rental properties. But after a while, I got burnt out as a landlord. And I just found out the cash flow wasn't as great because there's a mortgage on that. It's even worse when you've got HOA, homeowners association fees. And then if you bring in property management, which I did, I ended up managing the managers. So it became kind of a headache. So I kind of got out of that. And then I got into mobile home investing. And with mobile home investing, I took the cash that I got from selling my single family homes. And then I started buying mobile homes for cash. Then I fixed them up, usually just cosmetic issues. And then I just basically filled them with residents in these mobile home parks and got the cash flow from there. Much better cash flow because I paid them in cash and there's no mortgage on them. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
We will circle back and unpack pieces of that. Obviously, having you on, I want to spend most of our time in this mobile home investing journey and the ins and outs and the flow of things. I wanted to start in an interesting place. I've listened to lots of your work. I've heard you talk about this a little bit, but I feel like it's not covered enough. And so I want to spend a little bit of time here. You mentioned starting your blog, I think you said 2007. Is that right?
Yes.
One of the first real estate bloggers out there, and there are many followers, many folks after you guys started came in and said, we should blog about something similar. We should start blogging about real estate. I think you guys started in 2007 and the blogging community slowly ramped. And if you look today, a lot of those real estate bloggers fell back off. You've been blogging since 2007. Yeah. Here we are many, many years later. Can you talk to just a bit about consistency, right? Like how have you gone so long and been able to stay in the saddle, refrain from burnout, compete against the bigs and the littles? I just want to hear, is there anything to share or expand on in this field, being able to withstand the erosion, right? Being able to withstand so much.
So for me personally, I use the blog, just kind of an outlet to talk about my frustrations, to share my stories, my successes, but also my failures and what I learned as a real estate investor and then mobile home investor and, investing in mobile homes. And I think for me personally, what I did in the beginning, I worked a lot, not on the blog. I did on the blog, but it was more in the business. So I'd be in the field a lot. I remember one time I was working like 80 hours per week. And this was a home. And then I was working on a home. I was working with a plumber. It was late at night. And my friends had called me. They're like, Rachel, you need to come out. It's Friday night. I'm like, I'm with a plumber at a mobile home property in a mobile home park. They're like, just come out. So I went out. I'm not even dressed. They're like, who cares? And then, we went to a restaurant and I was eating dinner. And then the food came while we were waiting for the food. The food came. I got a plate of spaghetti. And I was so tired, my head almost fell on the plate of spaghetti. That's how much I was working in the business. So I can't speak to other real estate investors out there in terms of burnout. And everyone has their own experiences. They've got life, they've got family, they've got all kinds of things. But for me, I just kind of focus, put my head down. And then, when I had time, I would write in the blog and I tried to write as consistently as I could. And to me, it was more of a journal. So I was going to write about it anyways in my own personal journal, which I did. But I wanted to put it out to the world. And I don't know if you know this, Josh, but my blog actually started as an email to my friends and family. And then I would just kind of email like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And these are my, experiences and failures and just pretty much what I have on the blog. And then a couple of friends suggested, Rachel, why don't you just put this in a blog so that everyone else could see it? We like reading it, but how about everyone else? And then that's how the blog kind of started. And I looked into blogging. So, and that's how it worked.
I love that.
Yeah.
One of the things I heard recently was this from this guy named Sean Puri, and he gave this advice it's from My First Million. And I'm going to butcher this, but it was something about, one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make, especially younger entrepreneurs, is they turn their side hustles or their hobbies or their passions into their full-time jobs. And when it becomes your full-time job, you have to rely on that to start making income. You have to start producing, and you develop a different mindset. And I think what you said at the very beginning there, when I asked, you've been there since 2007, but doing this since 2007, how did you stay consistent? And you said, I was going to do this anyway. I was going to be journaling, or I was going to be writing here. You're not looking at this as, I have to be in the chair every morning at 7:30 a.m. and I have to be doing this, and I have to publish 2 times a week, and I have to make $2,000 a month. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You're looking at it as an outlet, and it's something you would have done whether it was being published or not. You made that clear. I want to make sure that I'm double clicking on it.
And then also I do want to mention that before I got into mobile home investing, I had the experience as a real estate investor in single family homes for several years. So it's not just, I was just hopping into mobile home investing and wow, I'm, successful overnight. I already had the skills. And then before I even got into real estate investing, I was a sales executive for a couple Fortune 500 corporations. So I already had the networking skills. I just kind of transferred that to real estate and then mobile home investing. So I had these skills. I just had to hone them in too. So
how did you find mobile home investing? I understand most people find their way into single family at some point and at least pick up the ball and look at it. But I think far fewer, I don't know what percent, you may know, from the real estate circle go into mobile home investing.
Right.
So did you find a mentor? Did you pick up a book? How did you find this?
No. Well, basically, I remember I used to go to the real estate conferences in person. And I remember everyone sitting around Lonnie Scruggs and him telling his story. For anyone who doesn't know, Lonnie Scruggs is considered like the godfather of mobile home investing. Just Google his name. But he's pretty much the one who kind of created the system of buying, selling, and owner financing these mobile homes. And I just remember there was a lot of people always around him, and he would tell stories like it's a campfire. And so, over the years, his name kept coming up. And then I started meeting mobile home investors who actually were and they're like, Rachel, you should do this, blah, blah, blah. I kind of looked into it. And then I got it was a course. Now it's a book. And then I tried my hand at it while I was a single family home investor. And I just had a bad experience with one of the mobile home parks. And then I decided not to do that until fast forward a couple of years afterwards. Then I got back into it when I had sold all my single family home properties and I had some cash to buy some mobile homes. Like, okay, let's look into this. Let's do this again. And then at that point, I actually went to another real estate conference and I did find a mentor. And this mentor, she was local to my area. I'm in the state of Texas. And we had the same background. We just clicked. She was from corporate. She came also from a Fortune 500 corporation. I was from sales. She was from human resources, but it's pretty much we were at the same level in terms of executive type. So we just kind of clicked. And then she kind of showed me the ropes. And her style is a little bit different because she's all about following Lonnie Scruggs to the T. She even sells the homes as is, doesn't even do anything, versus me. I come in there and I actually make it pretty enough, like what I would want to live in, like an apartment home. I put a little bit more extra money into these homes, but then I've found through experience that I get a better quality type of resident versus her. She did everything just like Lonnie Scruggs, advertised it as handyman special. She told me, Rachel, I don't even pick up a paintbrush. So so I do put a lot of, in the beginning, I did, since the resources were low, I did a lot of the work myself. My husband also helped me to fix up these homes as well, too. But then as I progressed and gained more and more experience, then I brought in contractors. And now I just exclusively work with contractors who do the work for me.
Are you comfortable sharing any numbers around scale? I mean, maybe how many properties are in your portfolio or just anything you could talk to it. We're talking about that's how you were introduced. I want to kind of just draw the line up to where you're at today. Can you share anything about where you're at?
I'm close to 50 right now, very close to 50. And what I've learned actually is that quality over quantity. And I've made a lot of mistakes. So one of them being, and this is a home that I just sold. I don't know if I told you, Josh, it was called the Rat House. And this lady, man, I didn't even know there were rats in the home. And we kept going to court. We went to court like 3 times. And then the last time the judge is like, next time I see you here, you're out. And what had happened was it all came out at the end is that her husband wasn't with her anymore. So a lot of the people that I work with, it's due to divorce or they split up. She was just basically, she actually told the judge like, oh no, there's mold in the home and blah, blah, blah. And the judge is like, we're not here for that. And I'm like, if there's mold in the home, I want to know about it. And she kept telling me, well, I have pictures, but she never showed me pictures. So, and then I get the home back, there's rats. So I had to get an exterminator. I know this is not about fixing up houses, but just as an example, I didn't get an exterminator. And I believe they found like something like 10 rats in them, different kinds of rats, and then 2 mice. And it was funny because at one point there was a skunk underneath the home. And the exterminator told me, Rachel, I got good news and bad news. I go, okay, give me the good news. He's like, the good news is there's a skunk underneath your trailer, but they eat rats and mice. I'm like, what's the bad news? And he's like, the bad news is there's a skunk underneath your trailer. Yeah. Like, oh my goodness.
I don't know which is worse.
So, yeah.
That is why all these raw land guys and self-storage guys come in and they're like, listen, we don't want to deal with the toilets, the tenants, and the termites. It's nightmares like that. But yeah. They have nightmares that I think they just hold their cards a little closer to their chest.
Yes, exactly. So that home, I was just like, okay, let's just fix it up. And I sold it for cash, and that was the end of that. So I sold that one for $40,000 last month. So, I'm out for that. I believe I bought it. Oh, it was something like 12 or 13,000 or something like that 5 or 6 years ago.
Almost worth the pain. Almost worth it.
Right.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Let's say, you're almost at 50. I think at this point, you probably have a very unique stance on deal flow. When you have 50 mobile homes, I think you're at a point where there's probably park managers or folks in the community that are able to reach out to you and say, hey, there's an opportunity on the pipe. Can you come in and get this? Or are you interested in investing in this? Where I want to go with this is I don't want to speak to someone that has 50 mobile homes or for someone that has 50 mobile homes. For the entry level person that's coming in and says, oh, this is super interesting. I don't own any mobile homes. Maybe you're talking directly to me. I'm coming from Channel View and I'm thinking back and saying, man, it'd be really cool to, invest in my community or own something like this and just give me something to reflect on and think about and work through. Where would I start to find my initial opportunities? Are there special real estate agents that, specialize in this vertical? Is there a MLS that I could go to that specializes in this? Where would I go to first?
Okay. Well, the first question I guess I would have for that person is, do you want to work specifically in mobile home parks and mobile home communities and buy the home only, knowing that the land is leased and you're never going to own the land, but you're going to own the home? This is exactly what Lonnie Scruggs did. And this is what I do.
That's the model you follow.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk through that.
Okay. So in that case, what you want to do is you want to, for me, I have a 2-hour radius and I visit every single park in my area. And it was over 200 parks in the area. I'm in Texas, so there's a lot of mobile home parks here. And then from there, I just kind of picked the communities that I kind of liked, that I thought, this would work, these types of people, looking at the cars, da, da, da. And then just went in and then just started talking to the park managers. And it's more of an art than a science, because I will tell you, most people, and I think this is people in general, they don't like when people come to them and talk down on them. And then that person is saying they're a real estate investor. So I pretty much just I'm a regular person. Hey, my name's Rachel. I just saw your sign. I just want to find some more information about the park. Then they go into their whole spiel. Then we do some chit chat. And then it kind of comes out either in that meeting or in a couple other meetings, I just kept showing up. Hey, this is what I do. I help people get into these homes. I'm looking for this, blah, blah, blah. And then either they like you or they don't like you. And I will be honest, Josh, not everyone likes me. So it really depends on personality.
That's what I was going to say. And you're picking up exactly what I was putting down. You're a salesperson at heart. You can feel it. I've been in sales 6.5 years. That's my 9 to 5. And that was going to be where I want to spend a little bit of time is like, what is your approach to that park manager? Because they're probably pretty sensitive selling it not directly to a homeowner or looking at a homeowner, but instead looking at it, looking at investors. And if you're coming in waving cash around saying, hey, I'm just here looking to invest in some properties. Do you have anything? They're probably not offensive, but a little aggressive, taken back. They're on their heels. Your approach to that is much softer. You're building a friendship. I'm in the area. I'm local. I'm just looking around, la, la, la. And you slowly work your way into that. Do you find many people are taking this approach? Like, are there other investors out there driving for dollars? I mean, that's basically what this approach is.
Well, honestly, because it's the nature of the business, there's not that much competition. There are investors, like me who actually do it. And I find that a lot of them, either they're also a real estate agent, but they'll go in there like this one guy, man, this guy was a character because I was in there and it was a couple of years back and I knew the park manager and we were talking and then he comes in, he's like, excuse me. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get back here. I can tell right away he was an investor because he had his little Bluetooth on and,
exactly.
Oh, I'm closing the deal, And he's like, hey, I'm an investor and, I want to buy some of these homes. And she's just kind of like, okay, well, here's our phone number and this is our address. Feel free to drive by and look at the for sale signs. But is he going to get leads from that mobile home park manager? Probably not. Mm-hmm. And then he just kind of left.
Do you have a certain attire? Like, how do you fit in there when you show up? Because I think to your point, if you show up in quote unquote investor clothes, or you try to look the part of quote unquote an investor and you're suited and booted and your hair's done, and that's probably works in some areas, maybe not so much in other areas. I can tell you it wouldn't have worked in Channelview where I grew up. So How do you approach that piece of this? If that question makes sense.
Right. Well, for me, since I'm in Texas, I've become more casual. Before this, I was living in Washington, D.C. when I was doing the single family homes and the wholesaling and the bird dogging and all that. And it's a different approach on the East Coast.
Great.
But here in Texas, my dress, I've kind of found a style and I have a uniform. So a lot of it is just kind of like what you see right now. And I call this my uniform. Basically, I wear a hat. I know it's not the most professional, but I wear a hat. I'm clean. I look clean. I look presentable. And then usually just a top and then jeans. And then depending on the weather, boots, because it's accepted here in Texas. But very casual. And I look young. So for me, what really works is working in family style parks. And I think we didn't touch upon that because there's different types of parks. The two main parks are the family parks and then the senior parks. And for me, the senior parks didn't really work because most times they would be working with older clientele. And I find that really didn't work with me because older clientele, when I had homes on the market, it would just, they had an issue trusting me just because I look young. I understand, it's like, I can't relate to you, but when I work with a younger type of clientele, like starter families or young couples, and they're about to have a baby or they just had a baby, they can more relate to me because I am younger. So again, it goes down to personalities. I've known a lot of mobile home investors who do well in the senior parks. And I've had that question with some of my students, does it work? It can for the right person and the right personality. So
let's say you get on site. I mean, you do your 2-hour radius. I think you said 2,000 plus parks. Like you just touch all these different parks and you find a few park owners that you find some synergy with. They're like, Rachel, this is really cool. I like what you have going on. Come back. We have some properties. The next time you're on, I'm trying to get down to what are your requirements? And the first level of requirement you drive onto the park is the park itself. And I know you mentioned there are different types of parks, the family park, the senior park. As you drive on to the facility, are there certain requirements or things that you're looking for to check boxes of like, this place has this? Does that question make sense? Of like what?
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I actually touched base on this on one of my podcast episodes, and we'll talk about the podcast later. But in the beginning, it was just kind of like, I just, want to find any deal. And I wasn't really looking for those types of things. But as I got experience and I made mistakes, these are kind of some of the things that I looked out for. For me, I need to make sure that the park is somewhere I feel safe as a female, either during the day or late at night. So I need to see that there are actually families in the park. If there's anything that looks suspicious, the types of cars, if cars are broken down, that means like the mobile home park management, they're not on top of things. So everything needs to be clean. Another item I look for are loose animals. Are there loose cats? Cats are okay because they just roam, but are there loose dogs? If there's loose dogs and some of the types the parks consider, the high-end parks that I work with, they don't allow are Rottweilers, those types of dogs, and they're actually loose, then that's kind of a red sign in terms of a red flag in terms of management. The other thing with the types of parks that I work with, high-end parks and nicer parks, they don't allow fences. So, and I always wondered that. And I started asking the park managers, and they're like, well, if we let everyone put their own fence, it's all going to look different. And we need the park to stay uniform and look a certain way. So they just don't allow fences. Now they do allow patio furniture. And then, you just kind of gauge the line between your line and your neighbor's line as well, too. Nothing on the porch. If there's a lot of items on the porch and management is on top of that. I mean, there's a lot of things you can see if it's been mismanaged, like the lawn, if the lawns are overgrown, and the management isn't putting notices out there on the doors for people to mow their lawn. And a lot of this stuff, Josh, honestly, you can find out just talking to the park manager. So a lot of it does deal with talking to the park manager and building that relationship, because you get to know how the park is run, how it's managed, what types of residents they have. And it's funny because the high-end parks that I work with, I actually know a lot of the residents because I'm out there. When I have something on the market, I'm marketing my stuff. I still market my stuff myself through my own flyers just by talking to residents. And, I have residents there for my own homes. And then I talk to their neighbors. So I kind of know the people who live in the community of these higher-end parks that I work with.
There are many things that could fit in that bucket. Like you said, the dogs, the fencing, things that are broken down, cars that are broken down, up on blocks, all sorts of things that you could go in and say, I'm not comfortable here. And I think that inner sense of, would I live here, or could I see myself walking through here day, nighttime? Those are really good sort of internal checks. Let's say that you're driving in the park, they're passing all those checks, that the management of the property seems fine. Everything's legit. There's no dogs running around. You drive up on the property, or you drive up on the actual unit itself. Can you walk me through that checklist? I've heard investors, single family investors, talking about the home must have been built after a certain year, or it must be a certain size,
or yes,
made of a certain material.
Right.
Do you have any requirements like that within the mobile home investment? Do you have a checklist?
Yes, I do, actually, because now I can kind of pick and choose my deals. Whereas when I was first starting out, it was pretty much anything. I will tell everyone here, my mentor, who I met at that real estate conference, she bought a lot of the stuff that Lonnie Scruggs would buy. If anyone reads Lonnie's book, Making Money with Mobile Homes or Deals on Wheels, you'll kind of find out that he bought a lot of like 1970s, 1980s style homes, which are smaller. Some of them don't have central heat and air conditioning. And my mentor, a lot of hers, they were using window units for air conditioning or portable space heaters for heating because they didn't have central heat and air. My first deal I bought, I believe it was a 1980s 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. And I got lucky because it actually had central heat and air conditioning. So for me, that's a big thing. I'm in Texas, so I do require that the units I buy have central heat and air conditioning. The majority of them are made in the 1990s and up, 2000s. If I come across like a 1980s or 1970s and it needs kind of a lot of work, I don't buy it. I just pass it on. I just wholesale it to another investor in my network, pass it on to the park manager for a resident who wants to buy it. So in terms of size, since I work with families, I prefer a 16-foot wide by 76-foot long, and that's without the hitch. The hitch is basically put on the mobile home. It's called a tongue or a hitch once you're ready to move it, but that's an extra 4 feet to make that home 16 by 80, but it's really 16 by 76 without the hitch. And now I did used to buy 2 bedrooms, but since I've kind of progressed, I only look at 3 bedrooms and up. I've bought 4 bedrooms. I've never bought a 5 bedroom, but I stick to single wides. I mean, double wides, if it, the right opportunity comes, but I find that the double wides, there's not as much room, like the layout is just wider, but it's not longer. And the types of families I'm working with, they are really used to single wides because they have family and friends who already live in the park, who are already living in a single wide style home. So that's what they're used to. So those are kind of some of the parameters that I work with. But most times I only look for cosmetic issues. So if there's some soft spots in the floor, that's great. If there's roof issues, if I can repair them, I'll get my roofing contractor out there to give me an estimate. I already have these people lined up. They'll come by and say, okay, Rachel, it's going to cost this much. Remove and replace, I can do, like remove a hot water heater. My plumber can do that. That's not an issue as long as the main systems are working, like central heat and air conditioning. If the central heat and air conditioning does not work and I need a new unit, that's a deal killer for me because that costs thousands of dollars to replace.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like buying another unit.
Yeah. So I've just passed on a lot of those without, and a lot of times if they're selling it because of that, that's why. And they're trying to get the funds to buy a new one that does have one.
Especially in Texas, we got to have that AC. It's so hot. In a perfect scenario, obviously if you purchased a mobile home in a park and then another home opened up and that park manager called you again, said, Rachel, here's another one. Do you want this one? My question is, in a perfect scenario, do you have a diversified portfolio? I'm putting that in quotations for folks that aren't seeing this. Or would you buy up all of the mobile homes in a park if you could? Like, would you want them all in one area where you could just do one trip and go see them all? Or is it better in this 2-hour radius you had, you saw 2,000 parks or whatever? Would you rather have one house at 200 individual or 50 individual locations, if that makes sense? Right.
Now, I will be honest. I do deal with different locations, but it's not 200 locations.
Yeah. Well,
so basically, I work actually primarily in 2 counties right now. And one of the park systems that I work within their sister parks. So the one that I just sold, the Rat House, that park has 500 units in the park. And then their sister park that I've also worked with before, I also sold a unit. I think it was last summer. I fixed up a home. That one has about 400 units. Then they have another sister park. This is all in the same county that I had been trying to get into this park forever and a day. And it was just when I first started out, just the park manager didn't like me. So I went back in when the park manager changed and it was a new park manager. And she was really nice, but she just wouldn't work with me because she was already working with other investors. Fast forward to today, where there's a new park manager because that old park manager, she retired. This new park manager was the assistant of the park manager for the sister park that I already work with. And she is so open to me working in this park because as the assistant of the sister park, when she was working as the assistant of the sister park, I gave her a Christmas present and she remembers me giving her a Christmas present. And now she's the manager of this park I've been trying to get into. And guess how many units this park has?
Tell me.
1,000. So she's like, Rachel, you can do as much business as you want in this park. So that's one county. Then I'm working in another county, and there's a couple different parks that I'm working in this other county. But again, it's also They weren't connected before, but now they are connected under the same company. But before they weren't. But I'm working on another, I think it's 150 space park. That's where the home that I'm fixing up right now. And that park, I actually had thought like, oh, I can buy all these homes because I really like the management. And back a few years ago, it was under just a mom and pop and they were in out of state and everything was great until it flooded. And when it flooded, I lost a couple of units in that. I just got lucky. I was able to sell some of those units. And one unit, the one that I'm working on right now, it didn't get flooded. So had I had 50 homes and it all flooded, that's it. Would I work in one park and have all? No, I wouldn't. And I do know, I knew Lonnie Scruggs' mentee. He actually had all his units in one park and it was a 400 space park. And he just got lucky because he made it, he got to where he wanted to get to. And then he went to mobile home park investing. He bought a couple mobile home parks. And then he got out of mobile home park investing because that's a whole nother story. There's more involved in buying a park than buying an individual mobile home. And he got into self-storage. But, he just got lucky. But, for me, what if I had all my units in that park and it flooded? Yeah, I do recommend people spread it out, but don't spread yourself out too thin. Just stay within the radius. Work, a certain amount of parks. I wouldn't deal with 200 parks, that's for sure.
Yeah. The advice you gave is exactly why I was asking. I have this fear, and I think it's a Texas thing, probably even specifically a Houston thing or a local thing here, but of flooding. I've had a family member of mine a couple years back that they went big in investing into single family homes, and they bought this bulk purchase from another investor, something like 17 units. And I think they bought 17 homes in one swing of the bat. Then we had this giant flood in Houston, like 6-8 months later, and they let these levees go and they opened up these dams and it flooded a lot of the city. 7 or 8 of those homes ended up being flooded. And I remember thinking like, oh, I cannot imagine what a headache. You're going to recover, but that has got to be mentally so draining, physically so draining. That's where that question was originating from. And I think you hit it right on the head there, even hinting at some of the properties flooding. What is the role of the park in all of this? I mean, I understand you're now buying the home, the mobile home that's residing, it's living on the park property, but you don't own the underlying real estate. That's somebody else you're working with. We've been talking about this property manager. Are they helping you? Do they just own the land? Are they helping you find people to fill the homes? Are they like, what role do they play in all this?
Most definitely. Since it's kind of like a marriage when you deal with a mobile home park and a mobile home park manager and owner, you're in on it together. So of course, when you have units as a mobile home investor, you want to fill the units with good people. So they've got to go through my application process first, where I check landlord, job, criminal, all that. And then if I have a good feeling about them, then I forward them to the park manager. But I don't forward them to the park manager to do their application for the lot until they check for everything else through me.
Nice.
So, and I do a lot of screening, and I do have the podcast, and I've already covered this in a couple episodes. I think it was a 2 or 3 part episode of one of my podcasts where I talk about screening residents and how to do it and holding open houses, all kinds of things, pretty much my whole system of doing it. But I would tell people, if you're going to go this route, you really have to be careful. Like in the beginning, I just wanted to fill it with whoever because, you're paying lot rent. And for those who don't know, lot rent is the amount of money that you pay for the mobile home to sit on that space. And that payment, that lot rent goes to the park. And the way that I have it set up, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You pay as the investor, right? Not the person living in the home. Who pays the lot rent on that?
Okay. You can have it either way set up. The way I do it is the residents get approved for the lot. I'm responsible for the lot if they don't pay, but my agreement is that they actually are responsible for the lot rent. And the majority of the parks that I work with, they're fine with that. They're like, we don't care as long as someone's paying. So,
money is
I mean,
green.
if you've got the relationship, then it's great. And you've picked good people. Now, if you haven't, then it's a whole nother story. Then, I've had to take homes back. And I told you about that rat house, and I did have to bring up the lot rent current. And, it was a mess. But if you have that mutual respect each other and they know that you're going to pay up the lot rent, then, it's just a matter of communication. So
I want to double back just real quick, and then we'll keep going down this road. But you having such a good relationship with, you mentioned the woman that just took over the new role. You had a relationship. She was an assistant in the past. She comes in, she says, you can do as much business as you want here. Have you thought about doing anything outside of mobile homes? And I know it's like, oh shit, another arm or another branch of business. I don't want to manage that or build that. But I'm thinking something of like, what if you put like on-site vending machines? Or like, have you thought about doing something simple like that? If you're already going to be on property, if you're already going to be boots on ground, stomping around and looking at things, like it makes sense. Let's just bring some chips and candy bars and
Right.
another stream of revenue. Have you anything like that?
Well, not really, because I don't own, the land. And I will tell you, I do know a lot of mobile home park investors who own mobile home parks. And that actually they've tried, they've tried the laundry service. It takes a lot of money in utilities, and then there's security issues. One of the better streams of income, if you do own a mobile home park, is actually landscaping. No one wants to cut their grass in a high-end park. But in terms of where do I go from here? For me, my next step is to buy lots and plots of land. And I've got different mentors, and a lot of my other mentors, that's pretty much what they did. They started with the mobile. Everyone gets started with the mobile homes in the parks. And then either people go out on land or they buy the park. For me, at this point, I don't want to buy a park. I actually had a conversation with Lonnie Scruggs about this before he passed away a few years back. And I asked him, Lonnie, should I get into the park? Why haven't you gotten into mobile home park investing? And he told me, Rachel, honestly, I want to have the freedom to go out with my wife and drive America in our RV. I cannot be doing that if I own a mobile home park, because it takes a lot of management. Even if you're managing other people who are managing it, there's a lot of unknown factors. And I talked about this in one of my podcast episodes. I think it's episode 13, The Truth About Mobile Home Parks. And there's a couple stories in there about mobile home park owners who bought parks and they got in over their head and they ended up selling the parks. So if anyone wants to check out, that's podcast episode 13, I think, about mobile home park investing. But my next step is to actually go out and just buy plots of land and sell the land, either owner finance, that's probably the best way to go, or rent out those lots. And I already have relationships with mobile home dealerships, because a lot of mobile home dealerships, they just need to find the land for their customers. And so my next step is to actually work with them. I'll find the land and then I'll just sell it to their customers, or they can package it up and finance, and I get cashed out for the land, however they want to work it, and then go from there. And then from there, I'm just dealing with land and not the homes anymore, because it does take time to fix up these homes. I've learned a lot, but I do want to progress into land and lots. So
I'm smiling so big because, one, your business model is perfect for raw land. I want to talk a little bit about the money flow. I see where I'm at on my time. I want to talk about sort of how things look financially, and your system is set up very similar to Mark Podolsky, the land geek, and the system that he teaches, as far as a little money down. They're paying you month over month. They have the chance to buy it outright. It's a very similar model. Let's maybe just go there for a second. For a newbie investor, could you, maybe we first start with, how much is a typical mobile home? How much does it take to actually purchase one? I think you mentioned at the top of the call, you're spending liquid cash. Most of the time, you're just buying it outright. How much cash does it take to typically buy one home, one property?
Right. And it depends on the investor and what type of park, what your market is, what type of clientele.
One of those 5 bedrooms.
Yeah. I will tell you, the first deal that I bought, it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. And I got lucky because it was in a high-end park. And I found this family just by passing out flyers. And the park manager already knew me. And she's like, Rachel, you can work here. But I didn't get the lead from her. I had to go out and find the lead. And they just liked me. There was no for sale by owner sign. She called me up, the wife. So, we want to sell the home, but they wouldn't give me a price over the phone. And I thought that was kind of weird. And I had mentors in the past who were like, well, if they're not going to give you the price, they're not motivated. But I was like, you know what? What do I got to lose? I set up a couple meetings. Fast forward, we do a little bit of negotiating, chit chat, we get to know each other. I bought that home for $3,600, okay, in a high-end park. It had central heat and air conditioning. They even cleaned the home for me. And basically, I turned it around. I found a nice family for it. In 2 weeks, they gave me $1,000 down and $250 per month for the next 4.5 years. So, it was a little bit of luck, but I made my luck.
What would be the average? And I know this is not an easy question because like you said, there's so much variety in states and cities and the number of bedrooms and park that it's in and all sorts of things. We're talking for a starter investor. Do you think it's 10,000 too much? Is that not enough? I mean, what would you ballpark the initial investor to be spending on?
Right. It would really depend on the area, because I know if you go out these areas, these higher end areas, especially like California on the East Coast or the West Coast, you see things, but these are things that are on the MLS or these are things that are listed. I had a student in Los Angeles, I believe it was in Los Angeles. They found a home for $4,000. They bought it in a mobile home park, but the lot rent was $1,000 a month. So, and the people who were actually, they sold it, they did the negotiating, but the people they actually found to fill that home, their buyers, they were downgrading because they were going into foreclosure from a single family home. So again, luck, but you create your luck. So, I mean, in terms of ballpark, just run the numbers, do a market analysis. And, if the prices are too high, either you're not looking in the right places or you're just looking at things that everyone else can see. Because a lot of deals, that even my first deal was an off-market deal. I had to put the work in. It's not like I'm just going to type it up. It's going to come up on the computer, doing a Google search. Those are probably what everyone else sees. So you got to put some work to get really good deals.
Totally. Yeah, I think those off-market deals is where it's at. And like you said, you can't find that in the MLS or sending emails, right? Like you're going to have to be out there stomping around and asking questions. I know how much a home, how much is it? How much could we expect to spend? That's a very generic, very broad question. How about cash flow wise? Do you have an estimate of like, you expect a home to produce minimum $200 cash flow, $500 cash flow? Do you have an estimate there as far as what is the average home return for you?
For me now, I do have standards. Like my first deal was $250 cash flow. And a lot of people, even Lonnie's student, his mentee, he would buy them. I think he would buy them for like $3,000 or $4,000. And then he'd get $500 down and he wanted at least $200 cash flow. But these were little Lonnie deals. And a lot of these homes were in the 1970s or 1980s. They had the flat roof instead of the raised, with the shingles. For me, I'm dealing with higher end homes that do have shingles and they're in the 90s or 2000s. So pretty much for me, I require a minimum cash flow of $500 a month. I've had some that are like $400, $450, but my minimum requirements now are $500 a month. I've had some that are as high as $600 a month, but minimum for me is $500. But for someone just starting out, I would just say the $200 to $300 per month per door is good enough as a starter.
Yeah, that's super. I think that's great insight. And you're doing math for you specifically. You're doing your rent, doing some back of the napkin math because they're having to pay the lot fee plus the rent to you.
Yes. And they're two separate payments. They pay the lot rent to the park. I say I can't even take that. That goes to the park. And then for me, you just pay me my portion just for the home. And they understand that. I have them sign everything and, they understand everything. A lot of being successful in this business, I will be truthful, and this is for real estate in general, investing is just to choose the right residents. And it's not the people who look good in paper, it's the people who are honest and upfront with you in the first place. So that's kind of just my secret to success, which isn't really a secret.
That's a pro tip, and it'll be clipped. I kind of joked about your model is very similar to Mark Podolsky.
Yes.
Someone comes in, they want to rent to potentially buy this property, is I believe how you operate. You give them the chance to come in, lease this or rent it from you, and they have the option to buy it in the coming years. Can you share a little bit about that? I mean, they're paying rent. Are they earning credits? And then when do they typically buy?
Right. And you got to be careful about that, Josh, because there are laws, because you don't want it to look like a seller financing transaction, because that's not what I do. You can do seller financing, just what Lonnie did, and charge an interest rate, but then you got to comply with laws such as Dodd-Frank and the SAFE Act. And that's a whole nother subject. And I just came out with a course on the Dodd-Frank and the SAFE Act for mobile home investors.
And
if anyone is interested. Yes. And the podcast. It's also, I think you did listen to the episode on that. So for me, I do a lease with option to purchase. And this is something that the residents, they actually feel good about, because the type of residents I'm working with they want to live in the home, but they don't want to make the commitment because they know I may not have this job forever, or I may have family that are sick and I got to go take care of them, but I don't want to be throwing money away at rent every month. So the way I have it set up is they pay me, the rent payment, then they have an option to purchase for a set amount. Now, what they can do is a certain amount. Whenever they make the rent payments, they actually earn credits towards that amount. That's how I word it. You don't want to say your rent payment, a portion of that goes towards the option purchase.
Got it.
That's a big no-no, because if you get stuck in court, which usually you're not going to, I mean, it's not going to happen. But if you do, you can get in a lot of trouble with the court system. And then that'll be recognized as a seller finance sale. And then you'd have to go to another court. But basically, you just earn these credits, and these credits that are earned go towards the purchase price of the home, the option purchase price. And I said, at any time you can just let me know if you want to know how much, you owe on the home. And then you can pay it off as early as you want. There's no penalties for that.
Could you unpack the credit portion of that, or maybe point us to a resource? Is it tier based of like 6 months into this, you now have every 6 months is $5,000, $500 worth of credit, or like, is it a credit like Rachel token? Like, is that just something that you made up in your contract?
They earn it. Well, they earn it. Yes. They have to earn the credit. And I tell you, look, listen, this is for 10 to 15 years, but this is an option to purchase. And then this option is going to expire if you don't make your payments on time, or if something happens, you can get out of it. And I will tell you, a lot of people do actually something comes up. I take the home back, but there are people who are like, you know what? I want to pay it off. I had people like 5 or 6 years, like, Rachel, give me the balance. I don't care. Give it to me. And then they just write me a check. They got money from something, and then they paid it off, and that's great. And we go our merrily, happy way. But I will tell you, you have to have that trust. And unfortunately, I find that a lot of investors, they don't take the time to put into these relationships. And that's where things like people end up in court, all kinds of things. You really have to put the time to put into these relationships, quality over quantity. Yeah. So
I pulled the full hour plus a couple from you. Very, very grateful for your time. I've consumed more of your podcast episodes in the last 2 or 3 weeks than I'm willing to admit. I've read articles, I've read blog posts. You have one of the cool feats, and I just talked to Katie Emery about this a couple days ago. I just interviewed her on the podcast, and by chance, both of you in the same week have a very similar feat. Someone else wrote about you. So I want to open the floor, and maybe you want to share a little bit about that. And then 2, for the folks that have tuned in and said, I need to know more about mobile home investing, where can they find you?
Sure, no problem. Well, I guess basically me and Katie were in Nick Loper's book, 1,100 Ways. And basically, the book shares my story and hers and other side hustlers, their expertise and niche. So I was in Nick Loper's book. He does have the podcast, The Side Hustle Show, which has been a long time fan of that show. So if you guys want to check it out, I'm sure you'll put a link to his book in the show notes.
Of course.
But both of our stories were featured in the book for my story on mobile home investing and my expertise on the subject. And then the second question, where can people find me? You can find me at adventuresinmobilehomes.com. Adventuresinmobilehomes.com. I also have a book, Adventures in Mobile Homes, and I'm sure Josh will link it up in the show notes. But I also have a podcast, and it's also called Adventures in Mobile Homes with Rachel Hernandez. And it's also on my website, adventuresinmobilehomes.com. And if y'all want to get social and say hi, I am also on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm at Mobile Home Girl with a U. And I'm sure Josh will link it up in the show notes.
Yeah, everything that you guys need that was discussed today, both here at the end as well as throughout this, will be linked in the show notes. I love that you used y'all. I don't get to hear that very often in my podcast, so that's exciting.
I'm in Texas, so
you're close enough to me to use y'all. For the listeners, thank you all for tuning in. Really, really appreciate the support. Miss Rachel, thank you so much for doing this. This was so much fun.
Cool. Thanks, Josh, for having me.
Yeah, listeners, you guys, everything that you need will be in the show notes. I will also be back here shortly with a summary right after we let Miss Rachel go. But with that is all I have for you right this second. Make sure you give someone that you love a call this week. Don't let life overwhelm you. And as always, stay on your grind. I'm sure you could hear it in my voice and my tone throughout the interview, but that did so much for me. I always enjoy learning about these interesting outside of the box ways to build wealth. Mobile home investing is definitely that, but this was more than that for me. It was nice to be able to scratch this itch, and living, just a block-ish away from this type of opportunity for 13, 14 years of my life. It's really interesting to have the opportunity to zoom out and study this for 3 or 4 weeks and think about what I lived right next to as an investment opportunity. Not only that, but one thing that stood out to me on this show, it may be the only time I've ever heard this, was Rachel towards the beginning of it says, there's not much competition in this field. How often have we heard that from any entrepreneur, any investor? That alone is worth shining a light on and echoing several times. If this episode spoke to you at all, you can check Rachel and everything that we discussed out in the show notes. We also talked a bit about raw land, and she talked about how that was going to be her next step. I have 2 interviews that I do a deep dive into raw land investing. So if you want to just meander that way, episode 40 with the land geek, Mark Podolsky, is my first swing at that. And then I do a double click, a sort of a 2.0 with a buddy of mine, the tallest man I've ever had on the podcast, Matthew Forbes. That's episode 70. You can find those episodes, the show notes, everything that you guys may need on my website, rhodestowealth.com. And that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I do. Until next week, where I have a very, very special episode queued up for you guys. Until next Tuesday, stay on your grind.